is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Sanjay Kalluvilayil, founder and CEO of StoneHaas Partners, and also host of the AI Space podcast. Sanjay turns theory into practice for AI startups, guiding them from winning their first clients to scaling operations and preparing for fundraise. Sanjay, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Hall. Wonderful to be here.
Great. So tell us more about the StoneHaas Advisors model. You have an advisory and a fractional CXO support for AI startups. Tell us how that works with scope, engagement structure, and what kind of outcomes are you seeing there?
First of all, thanks for inviting me to the show and a wonderful opportunity. I have 30 plus years in consulting and professional services. So I launched my consulting business last year, and I decided my niche would be work with AI founders to grow and scale. My strength is go-to-market strategy and execution. So developing the strategy and how do you execute in the marketplace, right? What's the strategy? What the tactics and activity that need to be done to achieve your metrics and to measure them and build that cadence. But what I found out is when you're dealing with startups, and I was a startup too. I'm sure when you've worked in large companies, Fortune 500, Global 500, okay, the strategy is easy because somebody else is doing the sales and marketing and the lead gen. But if you're an entrepreneur, you have to do that too. You got to put on your CMO hat. So I'm also finding out I've had to work upstream and help a lot of these founders figure out, okay, well, who's my target market? How am I going to get my first clients? And that's a long pole in the tent of anything. Because if you don't figure that out, down the road, you either burning your cash or somebody else's cash. And so what I do is either from a consulting model, which is project-based, could be a duration-based, like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or you had mentioned fractional. So instead of hiring somebody for several $100,000 and paying them benefits and full-time, you can be very laser focused and kind of like a retainer model for a certain amount of hours. You can pay on a monthly basis for strategic support, basically.
Yeah, sounds like a great program. I mean, you have a go-to-market framework that says win clients, convert sales, and scale ops. Talk about the first 90 days of that playbook and what challenges do you see people encounter with it?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I worked with an AI founder. He grew to $1 million organically. Wonderful problem to have, right? But he did that through his relationships and network, right? But at some point, that's not going to scale beyond it. He's giving sales information and scripts to salespeople, lead gen folks in the Philippines, right? But nothing was coming of it. And I said, well, yeah, garbage in, garbage out. So I say, hey, let's take a step back. So the first step was reevaluate his vision and mindset strategy, right? So he was building, and there's a lot of startups that do this, entrepreneurs. They have that lower my tax cost accounting mindset, right? But he wanted to sell in 3 years. I said, well, if you have that mindset, you're not optimizing your revenues and your cash flows for somebody to value your company at a large multiple, right? So that's the first mindset shift, is making sure you're building for valuation. I mean, you know this, right? They're going to look at 5 years of your accounting books and how things are going and say, from 5 years ago, not to make that work. You can't scramble at the last minute, right? So that's the first thing that needs to be figured out. Like, are you building for valuation, right? The next is we looked at his ICP, ideal customer profile. And this is something I had to figure out myself. And he had that in place, but he had 6 verticals. But when you want to scale, you got to get at least one of your target segments. You got to really be able to target them and work with them to grow. So he had 6 verticals, and we picked one, which was SaaS here, and we did a scoring on that to identify why it was the best one for him in terms of reach and value, etc. Right? I won't go into metrics here. And then we actually dove deeper into that one. And because of his ticket size was around 100K to 250K in terms of services, right? So in terms of the revenue size of the company, he's actually targeting too small of a revenue. So he had to go to a higher tier. I think it was like 50 to 75 to $100 million company size. He's going too small. So that's why a lot of the messaging was resonating. So we actually then once we figured out his ICP, we did some client questionnaires, some market research, actually interviewed some of the clients to see, hey, and sometimes your clients or potential clients or prospects are the ones that are going to tell you, are you actually solving a pain point that they're willing to pay for on a repeated basis? If you aren't solving a pain point that somebody's willing to pay for on a repeated basis, there's something wrong, right? It's not like, when you're watering the lawn
Mhm.
and there's 5 knots in the water hose, all the way from lead gen to actual sales, you got to get all the knots out, right? So
Mhm.
people have all the pieces in place, but sometimes the knots are, you open up those knots, right? So we got his, and then we work. I won't go into details here, but we worked on his offer, we worked on his messaging, and based on that, we thought we had something that resonated with his target base. And we also changed the mindset in terms of just being outbound. How do you become a lead magnet? How do you get people to come to you and reach out to you? So we developed some of those assets too. And now he's working on his sales campaigns. And his goal is, once he gets a little bit of revenue in, to bring me on a fractional basis as a chief growth officer or some sort of business development type activity, right? But the key thing is figuring that out. How do you build that structure, that foundation to drive revenues?
Right. Well, you've had experience with big company consulting, Ericsson, Tata, and others. How do you translate that to startup speed without the overhead? What lessons did you take from that?
Yeah, so I started at Ernst Young Management Consulting. So we're doing business process transformation on technology implementations. So we took technology implementations back. This was like in the late '90s, right? Took them down from 6 months to 90 days to 60 days to 30 days. So I was a business process lead. So I had wonderful mentors and leaders that taught me about business process transformation. I've also found out that I'm what I would say a very process oriented person. And so how do you streamline processes, et cetera, right? So I took business process transformation, software configuration. We also do end user training. So once you develop these efficient processes, at the end of the day, if the end user doesn't know how to use it and you can articulate it in a clear way, you've just spent millions of dollars for no reason, right? And so that mindset is, okay, you got to have an efficient process, but also the end user has to be able to understand it and use it in a meaningful way, or there's no results, right? And that's a key thing. Then I went to Ericsson when they were launching 2G, 3G, 4G networks. And that's a technology, right? But how do you grow the market? So I was doing go-to-market strategy and execution. So strategy, business cases, et cetera, to help bring in the revenue. They're spending billions on mobile infrastructure, right? But how do you get users onto the network? So you have to think about, what are the subscription plans, what are the types of services that need to be launched, right? And then I worked for, talk to communication transformation services on a sales. I worked for a little company called T3 Broadband as a SVP of business development. So I actually was able to secure a partnership with Samsung Networks. They targeted the big companies like AT&T and Verizon, but they realized for the regional players that they didn't want to chase that long tail. So it was kind of out of the blue, was able to forge that relationship to be the go-to-market partner for Samsung Networks at that time, for some of the tier two, tier three operators, right? And
Mhm.
so so now, instead of, you know, so I had all that corporate expertise, but now I want to work with the startups without the cost overhead of, paying for a large consultant and a team of 5 to 10 people, right? That can be rather expensive, into the millions of dollars, right?
Absolutely. That sounds like a great experience there. Let's talk a little bit about applying AI in the company today. You have the AI Space podcast, which covers many topics in this area. You call out human in the loop as far as, human review remains essential today, and talk about how teams operationalize that.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little backdrop about the podcast. So someone reached out to me about a podcast almost a year ago. And I said, what can I do? Hey, I'm trying to figure out this AI space. So I just trained, I'm 52 now. I turned 52 years ago. I actually said, AI's, coming down the pike, and I don't want to be in this corporate cycle anymore. So I need to build out something in the AI space, right? And so I'm trying to figure out this AI space. And then I said, why don't I give back and invite other people, other founders, executives actually building the AI space to get their insights and to help others figure out this AI thing, right? In terms of technology, strategy, sales and marketing, ethical, responsible, right? So now we're approaching 1 year, well, approaching 2 million views. I've had bootstrappers on, I've had CTO of AI of Cognizant, the CEO of Zapier, so a wide range of folks. So going back to human in the loop, people say AI agents are coming tomorrow, right? They're going to take all of our jobs. Question to you, Hull. Would you want in 5 years AI agents to take over air traffic control?
Probably not.
Exactly. So thinking about that for mission critical business activities, right? So yeah, on low level, entry level things that are easily automated, yeah, you maybe want some sort of automation tool or an AI agent, right? But something that's going to make decisions. But I say this on the podcast, in the human world, there's the principal agent problem. You're owner of a company, right?
Right.
And you hire people who are your agents or managers or other folks, and they may have their own agenda, right? Just like a salesperson, their agenda may be, hey, I want to go to vacation to Miami, or I have other incentives, versus they may not be aligned with the corporate objectives. Same thing, at some point, these AI agents are going to think for themselves and do things on their own, right? Be autonomous. The question is, okay, have you put the guardrails in place? But at some point, if it's a very important decision, you probably at this point want a human to be that check and make sure something doesn't go off the rails, right? For example, I think there was a car dealership where somebody's dealing with a chatbot, and somehow someone was able to get a deal from the chatbot for this super expensive SUV that cost maybe $100,000 plus for like $40,000. And the chatbot says, don't take these backsies, right? So that's not a good situation to get into, and they're legally bound to sell that expensive SUV, premium SUV for that price, right? So those are just some examples.
Well, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about compressing sales cycles and improving retention in AI products and services. How is AI different from non-AI products in this respect?
So I think the way AI tools, I think the tool's only as good as the data that you put into it. And at some point, you need a domain expert to build these tools, right? If you don't have the domain expertise, right? Just if I gave, a 16-year-old kid a Ferrari, right? And they hadn't taken their driving lessons yet, it's not going to do any good, right? So I think you have to clearly, before you get into any tool, you have to understand what your objectives are and what are the processes. And it's like going back business trend. Well, so if you got 10 steps, what can be done more efficiently, right? If you without any tool, are there things that you can change some steps, remove some steps? So now if you add a tool on AI, can it make it go faster? Can it make it more efficient, right?
Mhm.
But then when you get into AI, into something like AI agents or automation, instead of having manual processes or having an entry level person putting in the data, right? Now, if it's automated and it's been tested to be able to streamline where the agent does it automatically and does all the checkpoints. Yeah, you may even compress something that's going from 2 weeks to maybe 3 days, or something from 3 days to an hour, right? And I think those are things that need to be figured out, but it's not something there's no easy button. There's no magic. I mean, it takes some time to configure that and make that work. And going back to human in the loop and making sure things change, right? And businesses are a living organism. Things change, environment changes, and you got to make sure that whatever tool you're doing is adapting to that, right? And then going back to the retention portion is, are you, the challenges when we're dealing with any large companies, can we contact them? Are we waiting online for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, right? Are there things in terms of chatbots or other tools that can get access to information and give us access or find solutions in a very meaningful way, right? I don't have time to go on Google and spend 15 minutes reading PDFs and finding solutions. And sometimes as an entrepreneur, I'll go to a chatbot like an LLM, Chat GPT, or say, give me step-by-step directions to do X, Y, and Z in this tool, and it'll list it out for me. And I just saved hours and can do something in 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I mean, on the AI Space podcast, you talk to a lot of AI leaders. What are you hearing from them about the go-to-market in 2025 and 26? What's the top of mind for those guys?
Yeah, I think what's resonated is, first thing we always talk about, it's great to have a vision or dream, right? But ideas are dynamism. And you have to focus on the right actions to get the right results. Before you get to any sort of technology, it's really that mindset about same thing with my podcast. It's like, it's not fun, but posting every day, being consistent every day. So before you get into anything like that you have to have that mindset. But then also, I think the low hanging fruit in terms of AI is really the things that can be automated or you can add values, like lead generation, automating your sales campaigns, right? Enriching that data, maybe doing some research onto your prospects to find out what's your background, what are the things that may resonate with them, if there may be news clips out there in terms of what they're trying to solve. They just raise some funds, they're going to deploy in the market, right? Trying to understand potential needs and where you can solve that, right? And the next level I would say is automation, right? In terms of how do you make things more efficient? And I think one thing we got to think about is not only just reducing headcount by 10x, which a lot of companies are doing. You're seeing a lot of layoffs right now,
Mhm.
10,000, 13,000 big companies, right? Meta, Google, UPS, Amazon, etc. Right? I think we also have to figure out how do we get 10x more out of our employees, not squeezing them. And I'm not talking about squeezing them, making them be much more productive in a meaningful way without adding a lot more hours and making the work environment a lot better. I think that's where we need to get to. And then also based on the conversations, I think we need to think a lot more about the risks of AI, the potential risks, and making sure that there's governance and framework models in place to, there's a lot of unintended consequences, right? And AI could be an existential threat to humanity at some point if we don't build it responsibly, right?
That's a good point. But let's talk about community and service. I mean, you have board and service work that is shaping your leadership approach with founders. How do you find it impacting your advice to them?
Yeah, I think, in the past, I was on the board with Night Possibilities, and they were working with folks that have young people that have, development disabilities, right? And so when they turn 18, what do they do, right? Are they trained to go into the workforce? What happens when the parents leave, right? And I think people are surprised because I didn't have any family members or kids with those issues, but I wanted to give back and use my talents in a meaningful way to help them grow. I think what I've learned with this podcast is unintended consequences. I thought I'd give back and by doing that podcast, right? But it's turning into something that's almost turning into a full-time job for me that actually having fun. I'm unlocking, and then when you do it, when you're giving back, there's unintended consequences. You actually, when something's meaningful, it a lot of times it unlocks things that you don't may not see in a corporate environment. By doing this podcast, I'm unlocking a creative side of me because I'm doing thumbnails, titles, I'm using AI tools, AI animation. So sometimes I think it's good to explore different things, but and the net result is unintended consequences is that the byproduct is you may see a different side of you that you're not even aware of.
Well, great. Well, let's talk about how AI is different for the go-to-market teams than before, in the hiring profiles, the sales solutions, the engineering blend, and the fractional leadership you might be bringing in. What's different with AI this time?
I think it requires a different mindset because one example is some of these large companies that have been doing some of the layoffs, at least one of the reasons they felt like some of the employee base could not transition into the AI. And I think and that's a tough thing, right? And, I think, I'm in my 50s now and I'm learning AI. So I'm not necessarily, I'm not in my 20s or 30s, right? I think it requires a different mindset. You have to be able to adapt and learn. And, I don't think you can use AI. There's some studies out where a lot of the AI projects are not returning return on investment because a lot of times people say, we're doing AI just for an investor to hike the valuation, where it's not doing anything meaningful. Because if you're not doing AI, I think you got to find the bottlenecks in your business. So what are the bottlenecks? Is it lead gen? Is it your operational efficiency? Or is it going to be something that's going to create an impact, right? And that's where I think when you go into you say how we're doing AI differently, the successful companies are the ones that are going to figure that out. Either you're removing a bottleneck or creating impact. Otherwise, you're going to be, like I said earlier, you're going to be spending a lot of money and burning either your cash or somebody else's cash at the end of the day, which is not a good scenario for anybody.
Okay. Well, let's talk about raising funding for AI companies. How are the metrics different and what kind of customer traction story do we tell? And how do you provide operational proof to the investors for AI? How is it different from them before?
Well, unfortunately, I think in some cases, people are throwing money at AI, right? And so if you're in a certain group or an accelerator or what have you, right? So those are those cases, right? But for people like me, I figure I didn't want to raise funds. I'm bootstrapping whatever I'm doing. I truly believe if you're willing to spend some time the key thing is figuring out your lead gen and sales and how to get your first clients and building that revenue base, getting that flagship set of customers in terms of 2 or 3 flagship customers that are going to stay with you and help you build. And I think you have to figure that out and get to your 10, 100 clients. So I'm not going to go the traditional way how people do it. If you can get to your first couple clients, get steady state on revenues, and then grow, then I think you're going to be able to attract real investors and real partners, and not a transactional thing where people are throwing money at you because you're 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 that may pop, right? If you want to be successful as a startup entrepreneur, this is a long pole in the tent. Figure this part out. How are you going to generate revenues on a consistent basis? The rest will work itself out, because once you have money flowing in, you can hire people, you can get the tools, you can do all things, and you can attract the right level of investors. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the basics of fundraising stay the same, but maybe changing a little bit the format of the fundraise, in that there's so much more money available. There's so much more money available that some people actually take it. But we have to think about, are we going to be able to give them the metrics they want for the money they're giving us? If not, well, maybe we shouldn't take so much and dial it back a little bit to achieve the goals that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think also one of the concerns is, are we in sort of, you remember the late 90s and early 2000s, the dot-com bubble? We have a lot of companies out there that are launching, and they're spending money. If you look at even ChatGPT or Google, for all these tools that they're using, we're paying subscriptions, they're losing money on all that, right? But they have the funding to make that happen. But if it's some, if you're an investor and you got some startup and they're doing the same thing, are you going to be able to do that for 5, 10 years? That's probably not a good scenario. So, I mean, not everyone's going to be Amazon, where they can lose money for multiple years and then be profitable, right?
Right.
So it depends on how you want to do that. I think cash flow is king, right? And I think that's a key thing to focus on. If you're a small company, unless you have somebody who's going to fund you for 5, 10 years, right?
Right. Well, I mean, AI is a very powerful tool. And one of the questions investors ask is, okay, so what are you doing and what is the AI tool doing for you? Because competition will be using the same AI tools. And so differentiation usually comes down to proprietary data and unique algorithms you can come up with. And so investors are trying to divine that out from the AI company founder as to what's really going on here. What's been your experience?
Well, I think there is some point, but I think when a lot of these models came out, that was the case. But now a lot of them, even like these vibe coding tools, they're using the same underlying model. It's either Cloud Code or another LLM, right? So I think it goes back to, people forget, are the people that come into the have domain expertise. We have to go bit garbage in, garbage out. I'll give you an example. I mean, a lot of these podcasts have been out for 10 years, and they didn't have the tools out there when they started their, multi-million-dollar podcast, whatever. I started a year ago, bootstrapping, and I'm using these AI tools to improve my thumbnails, to improve my description, improve everything. I don't have a team. I mean, I use an editing team, right? And I had a team that I had originally that was supposed to be doing turnkey services, but I felt at some point the bolts were coming off. So I had to take more of the creative in. So I'm using the tools and other things to actually improve the quality of my podcast, improve time to market, increase views, increase subscribers, and getting monetization. So I think it's also everyone can have the cool tools and the algorithms, but who's really driving? Going back to the car analogy? Who's driving the Ferrari, right? Is it an F1 racer, or a 16-year-old kid at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. I find with investors, if you just come and talk about AI and you don't really mention any core competencies, they start to wonder if you really have any. I talked to a founder the other day that their competency was pulling data out of legacy databases, and we're working in regulated industries where that was a key skill, and that AI was supercharging that skill. So they start with a competency, and then they show how AI layers on top of it. And if you never talk about core competencies, people wonder, do you really have anything?
No, I think that's a great example where you have to have some sort of core competency, and we're talking about domain expertise, right? And if you're going from if you've done that for like a data analytics, big data perspective for the last 10 years, and now you putting AI on top of that, and you understand how to use it, you can get a 10x, return from that competence, right? Or even 100x at some point.
Yeah, and with AI, because so many people are reusing the same tools, thin wrappers around OpenAI or those type of things are probably not going to last very long. There's just going to be too much competition, and we find that proprietary data and proprietary models, you really understand a business segment very, very well. That's also a differentiator that a lot of investors look for.
I think that's an excellent point. because that's what we bring up too. Is like, do you want the Quiz Bowl champion to running your company, or somebody that's, let's say you're a oil and gas company that understands oil and gas vertical, right? And has expertise in that. So a private model that's been trained maybe with RAG or some other sort of methodology that has specific oil and gas information and that can answer the questions, because a regular normal LLM to not be able, they'll give you maybe some good answers, but not deep dive into the right things, or they'll hallucinate and make some things up, right? It's kind of like, do you want the Quiz Bowl champion operating on you, or the surgeon that was trained in med school operating you at the end of the day, right? Sometimes these people don't realize that these LLMs, these chatbots are smart, but they're not experts in everything. They haven't been trained in, especially from an enterprise vertical perspective, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here today, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think we need to talk about the human aspect of things. I think AI is coming fast. I think people need to understand it. They say, you can ride the tide, but like I said, one of the reasons I said, if you don't know how to surf, it's hard to ride the tide or you'll come crashing down. So I'm going to encourage people to learn how to surf in the next couple of years, because AI could be a good thing, and it could be a tsunami too for some people. So I just want to I'm not trying to be an alarmist or anything like that, but I just want everyone to be prepared, or for the good, the bad, and the ugly of what can happen, right?
And new technologies tend to bring that, and we have to learn how to deal with it. So I think that's a good point. So, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Sanjay Kalluvilayil, StoneHaas Advisors. You can reach me on stonehaasadvisors.com, or go to the AI Space Podcast on YouTube, or the AI Space Podcast.ai.
Great. We'll include all your contact details in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Paul, I really appreciate it. Thank you for this conversation.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.